Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me in the middle of the day, but it is with a great reason why I am doing it on my lunch break. Very excited about it. This is episode 9 of Realm Runners. I am ecstatic with the way it's been going so far, especially with the guests that I've had, the guests that are going to continue to be on the show. Be sure to subscribe and follow. Next week is Timothy Wolf, Chance Dillon the week after that. A lot of really awesome people. And my guest today is one of my biggest. He's on my Mount Rushmore. When I sent out the first couple invitations and he said yes, this was essentially me. I was like, oh wow, okay, so that sounds about right. But I am extremely grateful that he said yes. I've got my stack right over here to the side. The camera's blurry. It's terrible. Blame Apple, not me. But I am so pumped to bring him to the stage, Mr. Anthony Ryan.
Hello. Hi.
Hello. How's everything going for you today, sir?
I'm fine, thank you. I finished the edits for my most recent book and sent them off to my editor today, actually. So,
Oh,
yeah.
so that's productive already.
Yeah,
Is it? I was going to end up being my last question, but is the book that you just finished doing the edits today? Is that book 3 of Age of Wrath or something?
it is, yeah.
It
So,
is.
can't reveal the title yet because
No, that
there's always a bit of back and forth with my editor about titles. So, we'll
well,
see what it's going to be.
that's even promising that it got sent out today too, because I'm ecstatic to even start the second. I finished the first maybe a couple weeks ago, and I'll get into that. But I wanted to kind of start with like a timeline from really the beginning. I have some questions, some that I grabbed from close friends, some from a couple other um, avenues. But I wanted to start with talking about Blood Song because it is, you know, obviously self-published. It is on my top 5 books ever list. I think it's the best self-published book that's ever been written. I've talked to a couple other people. They all have a similar rating on that, I would say.
Yeah.
But what were some of the earliest seeds you had writing Blood Song? Did it start with like a scene, a character? What made you dive into writing with that story?
I think with Bloodstone, I mean, it's so long ago when I started writing it. It's well over a decade, I mean, close to 2 decades, I think now. Um, I always find it difficult coming up with the starting point for any of my books. They just a load of different ideas go into my head. Then, over a period of months or years, they percolate, and eventually a book emerges. But I think with Bloodsong, it was probably more character driven than most of what I've written. There was something about Valen as a character. I think he came first. I wasn't entirely sure who he was or where he came from, but there's snippets from his life kept sort of cropping up in my head. And he hung around in various forms, and the world that he inhabited was, changed from time to time before I ever started writing. Until I kind of settled on once I had an ending, a reasonable through line for the story of his life or his early life, and I had an ending. That's when I thought it was time to start writing. Uh, this is something I've stuck to. Where I won't start anything unless I'm sure I've got an ending, even though the ending might change. But the inspiration for Valen comes from a lot of different places, mainly historical. And the world is sort of a mix of medieval and early Renaissance. Which, I remember reading about at the time. It wasn't that long after 9/11 when I started writing it, so there was a lot of thoughts about religious conflicts, you know, spinning around in my head, and certainly come to the fore in that book. Yeah.
That's interesting because I know that you have a degree in history. I have a degree in history, but not anything similar to you, I'm sure. But I was gonna mention and see whether that background that you have kind of bled its way into the stories and everything, because obviously that's something that you know have an incredible knowledge base about.
Yeah, history remains my primary point of inspiration for most of what I write. Um, I mean, even before I ever did a history degree, I was reading history for fun and watching history watching documentaries about history and so on. I never seemed to get enough of it. So yeah, it definitely has always been my primary inspiration. It certainly was for Blood Song, now series, and most of the series I've written since. Uh, it's well, there are advantages to being a fantasy author as opposed to being a historical fiction writer or a historian. With fantasy, you can just take what you want from history and make up all the rest. You can edit out all the boring bits and just use the interesting bits. And it's not copyrighted, so no one can stop you doing it. Yeah, there are advantages to writing fantasy over historical fiction, I think.
It was funny when I read Covenant of Steel. I started that last year, but I read Pillars of the Earth right before that, and
Mm.
the main character is John Builder, and then
Yeah,
reading Covenant of Steel, it's Alwyn Scribe, and it was
yeah,
just funny to see how the profession just became people's last names. I was like, when I read Pillars of the Earth, I was like, oh, I never knew that, and looked it up, and then the next book I read, it's just last name Scribe, and I was like,
yeah.
all right. But bringing it back because, like I said, Blood Song, in my opinion, is my personal favorite self-published book. Um, what made you start self-published and then pivot into the traditional route?
Well, I'd like to say it was part of some great plan and that I actually had a choice over it. I didn't really have a choice. I self-published Blood Song because every agent I sent it to sent it back. Uh, they weren't interested in representing it. I had some nice rejection letters, but at the end of the day, none of them wanted to represent me. So, I could either stick it in a drawer and forget about it or self-publish it. And it was 2011, 2012-ish sort of time when self-publishing on the Kindle store and elsewhere were becoming more of a thing. It was really starting to take off, and there were people already, reaching bestseller lists and making a living just self-publishing. So I thought yeah, it was worth a try. And if it went nowhere, it went nowhere. Try something else. Because one thing I will say for myself is that I've never given up as a writer. Learning not to give up is another skill you have to learn as a writer, I think. Because the temptation, especially when in the early days you get nothing but rejection, the temptation to give up is always there. I think you just have to learn not to, and just keep at it, really. And disappointment is unfortunately part and parcel of the whole experience, especially when you're a novice. Um, so I self-published it, thinking maybe if I sold 1,000 copies, I could interest an agent in it. My goal was still to get traditionally published, but by the time it wasn't, I didn't get approached by an agent. I got approached by Penguin. Uh, it was about 5 months after I published it on the Kindle store. Instead of selling 1,000, I'd sold, I think, somewhere in the region of 40,000 copies by then. So
I
it's
bet
sort
that
of
made
taken
all
off.
those agents like, whoops.
Yeah, I like to think so. Uh, but I'm not bitter about it. But yeah, so yeah, when
Did
traditional came along, I had to make a choice. Was I going to stick with self-publishing because it was working out? I've done quite well at it, but largely by accident because I made some real mistakes. I didn't get professional cover and I didn't get it professionally edited, which I should have done. That was my two big mistakes. But I kind of, people just liked the book enough that they forgave me. So yeah, from the point at which Penguin got in touch, I had a decision to make. I think I decided ultimately to go with traditional publishing because it's what I'd always wanted, and here finally was my chance. I think it's worked out, but I don't regret doing it.
No, I would definitely say it worked out. For books 2 and 3 of that series, when those were traditionally published, was there
Mm.
any kind of influence from people other than yourself now that may have influenced the way the story was written? Like, did you have to take anything out and maybe save it for later? Or when you started writing Bloodsong, did you know the way that that whole arc was going to go?
I didn't. I knew the rough shape of the sequel of Tower Lord. I didn't, but I didn't start writing Blood Song knowing what was going to happen in Tower Lord. It sort of emerged over the course of writing Blood Song, and what was going to happen in Queen of Fire emerged over the course of writing Tower Lord. Um, but in terms of editorial input, there was some. There were mainly around just clarification. With the professional edits, most of your comments are going to be making things clearer. I don't understand why this character did this. Can you make it clearer? Uh, but it wasn't like I had to do massive rewrites on either book. I had to do a bit of rewriting, but not a hell of a lot. It's still my book. My books, and that's been the way it's been with all of my books since. I think.
And the last question, mainly that I have about Bloodsong, by the end of the series, even by the end of the first book, Valen's name is legend. It's synonymous with it.
Hmm.
Um, how did you? I'm sorry, I'm looking at my other side. I can't figure out how to connect a MacBook to this docking station. But how did you approach him becoming that myth, while also writing him in a way where he's prone to not prone, but he's fallible. He's a human. But
Hmm.
how did you kind of walk that fine line where it was like, this is the way he's going to end up. He's going to be viewed this way, but he's a regular person in the moment. Was that
Yeah.
challenging?
I think once again, drawing from history, every sort of pseudo legendary figure in history was an actual human being. Uh, they were not the perfect, amazing person that they are made out to be, because that's simply impossible. Uh, yeah, but the Romans would make their emperors into gods when they died, But of course, nobody can actually be a god. Uh, and I think the thing with legendary figures is the ones who have gone down positively in history, people who tend to attract admiration as opposed to opprobrium, are people who didn't set out to be legends. It just kind of happened to them. You contrast someone like, I'm thinking of the Byzantine general Belisarius. I don't know if you ever heard of him, but he had a famously unpleasant end. But I think he had a very distinguished military career in the Byzantine Empire. Um, and it's kind of gone down in legend as one of history's great generals. Um, I don't think he set out to be that, but you contrast him with someone like Emperor Nero, who definitely set out to try and become a legend, and he did, but he's a legendarily ridiculous figure. That was not his intention. That's how history views it. And I think history, when it's objective and properly you know sourced and properly studied, history is objective like that, and it can often be a harsh critic. Um, it tends not to misrepresent people in the long run. So, I'm sure the people in the political sphere at the moment, imagining that they're one day going to have statues to them and be celebrated as a great man or whatever, I think they may well be mistaken. But time will tell. History will have the final verdict.
When that was what made Covenant of Steel so much fun, because you're reading Alwyn's account of his life, written
Mm.
by him, obviously, but
Yeah.
there's no illusions about him being a hero in that. It is
Yeah.
very um, what's the word? He's very aware of the mistakes that he's making, even while it's happening. Um, but as far as um, the writing narrative from Bloodsong to Covenant of Steel, what was your main focus for kind of pivoting and having the character live his life and also go through that scribe profession where he's dictating it to us, the reader?
I think with Valin's story, it's the first book is not in first person because I always wanted to have more point of view characters in the sequels, which is why the first one is not in first person. Uh, and with Alwyn's story, with the Covenant of Steel, I very much wanted to try and do an entire series from just one point of view, and mainly see if I could pull it off. And especially with a protagonist who wasn't automatically sympathetic. I'd always been a fan of George MacDonald Fraser's Flashman books. I don't know if you've ever read those. It takes the conceit of Flashman was the bully in Tom Brown's school days, and George MacDonald Fraser takes the view, uses this conceit where this is the rest of Flashman's life, where he's a horrible, self-centered coward throughout the entire Victorian era, but gets celebrated as one of the great soldiers of the Victorian era, even though he's not a hero in any way. And everything is told from his point of view. It's his memoir, and he's completely honest about what a terrible human being he is, all the way through the whole thing. And he goes from, you know, the Afghan wars through the Indian Mutiny and all the way through the American Civil War, being a terrible coward the whole way through, but being celebrated as this great hero. And I was always struck by that, even though I think Alwyn isn't as big a bastard as Flashman is. Certainly, Alvin has his moments of heroism, and put it that way, but it's not his automatic. It's not his default state. He ends up that way through no fault of his own. There's a curious sort of dichotomy between him and Balin as well, because Alwyn is honest in his memoirs up to a certain point. There are certain things, you can probably tell when he's lying, sort of thing. But with Valin's more of a liar than Alwyn is. The conceit of Bloodsong is that Valin's telling his story to Vernier as described, who's writing it down. But as time goes on, we realise that Valin is telling some complete lies, some huge whoppers, for his own reasons. So there's a curious paradox there that I think Balin is more virtuous, but Alwyn is more honest, at least with himself.
Yeah, definitely with himself. It's always funny to read his account of something, and he's like, "Well, reader, you probably heard it like this, but it was actually," and like you said, he's a little more honest because the way that you have heard it as, what as a historical account is not what he was saying, and he's a little more brutally honest and open with himself.
And I wanted to convey the sense that he's not happy with the way he's been depicted in history. He's kind of annoyed that he didn't get what he believes is his due. That sort of comes through from time to time.
Yeah, that happens a couple of times, and even when he's talking about like when he goes to the parlay before the battles, and he's talking about the paintings that have been done at this time, and he's like, you probably saw me as a hero standing beside her with the flags fluttering. No, and it's like it was very refreshing to read that, where someone's being honest and not making themselves to be as big of a hero as it is. He came across much more genuine that way, and I loved The Pariah. I read a bunch of books before that, and it was, great book after great book. And then when I read that, it was, I have a wife, a 2-year-old. I work a second job at night, and I finished the trilogy in like 3.5 weeks. And that was one of the first books in a really long time where it sunk the hooks in and was like, it felt like 20 minutes went by, and I'd look and it was like 12:30 at night, and I was like, oh, I should sleep finally. But one of the questions I wanted to ask, I got from Reddit, a really good subreddit over there called Grim Dark Epic Fantasy. But this was a good question. They wanted to know from a narrative crafting piece, when and how did you include the decision to include the historian from the future scenes, where it kind of foreshadowed Evadine as what she actually is? I'm trying to be loose with the spoilers.
Yeah.
Um,
That's the curious thing. The historian, there are points where Elwyn, goes into a sort of vision state and meets a historian. The historian's from the past, not the future. A lot of people don't get that. He's not. The historian is in the past, and he's seen the future. And Alwyn's consciousness has gone into the past to meet the historian who's seen the future. I know it's complicated, but that's
Oh,
that,
because he put from the future in quotes. I read that wrong. Yeah.
yeah.
Hard to get that across via text to words. But yes, if you could go on. Sorry to interrupt.
So yeah, and it's really it was necessary to wake Alwyn up at that point in the story where he needed to know what was going to happen. And I needed a reason to reveal to him what was going to happen, which informs his ultimate decisions, which come out in the third volume, which is called The Traitor for a reason. So yeah, it was all mainly plot driven. It's a very useful device having magic in a narrative when you need to get a character to a certain place psychologically. Magic's always a great way of doing that.
And is that also where you came up with the idea for the Sack Witch and everything relating to that subplot? Because that was also incredibly interesting to go through there. That culture and the way that they view the magic and the way that it works.
Yeah. Well, yeah. There's in most of my books. There's always some sort of outsider culture. In the Raven Shadow books, it's the Siodar and the Lonak who were the original indigenous inhabitants of this land that became the unified realm, but got displaced. And the Siodar live in the forests, and the Lonak live in the mountains. There's always in Covenant of Steel, it's the Kerith who, the survivors of were envisaged as a kind of higher civilization that had fallen because in what was called the First Scourge, which is this apocalyptic event. And the Kerith are kind of the remnants of that civilization who practice magic and live longer than the rest of humanity lives. And having that outsider culture is always useful for this. They're a repository of wisdom. It's somewhere for the main protagonist to go and learn things. And also they serve as a sort of contrast to the main civilization, which is a fairly brutal, unjust medieval society which has a lot of problems that the Kerith don't.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite parts of the book was after that avalanche happened and they wake up and are with the Kerith, because that's one of those things where it builds upon the world so much that you're finding out all this lore and all this stuff happening so much before the story that it really is kind of enlightening to what's going on during it. Was there kind of a base for what you wanted to do going in with the Kerith, or is that just kind of sticking with what you said, where it helps to have an outsider culture in a way to move the plot?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't have a full idea of who they were at the start. Also, it was an editor's note actually that in the Pariah that my editor thought it would be a good idea to make them more present in the narrative than they already were. So I added a couple of characters and allusions to them that weren't in the first draft. But yeah, like a lot of things in my books, even though I do write to a plan and I do some world building note taking before I start, I don't have everything when I start. Things evolve over the course of writing. I know I kind of go into it knowing that I'll come up with something, or hopefully come up with something. whilst I'm writing, and fortunately, it tends to work out that way.
And especially before I start asking about Age of Wrath, which is takes place in the same world, but the scope of this world is so much more than we had previously seen.
Mhm.
How do you kind of have a balance between the complex world building, like all of the lore and the cultures and the histories, along with the character development? Because I feel like a lot of people would praise your characters up there as the most fully fleshed out.
Yeah, well, the characters exist in the world, so they are informed by the world. They're a product of the world. So, a character from Ascalia, which is the principal focus of the Age of Wrath, which is this sort of Norse-esque culture to the north of the main kingdom in Covenant of Steel. Someone from that society is going to act differently and speak differently than someone from Alwyn's society, for example. So they do inform each other. At the same token, you can't. I try not to make characters into caricatures. We all have an idea of what a Viking was. There's a big guy with horns on his helmets who, is probably drinking too much mead and swinging an axe about every chance he gets. But the historical reality of the Vikings was very different. They were, first of all, there was no Viking is not a nationality. Viking is a job. Viking means either warrior, explorer, or trader, depending on the context. So you could have Vikings from Denmark or Norway or Sweden. They weren't all, one amorphous mass of people who all thought the same, did the same, and acted the same, or anything. And there were as much merchants as there were warriors and raiders. It varied quite a lot, depending on where they went and what they went there for. So I was trying to reflect that. I always try to reflect nuance or include nuance in depicting a society and not have them become caricatures of themselves. Because A, it's kind of lazy writing, and B, personally, I don't find it interesting. It's more interesting if they're, as close to an actual human being as I can make. And human beings are always complicated.
Yeah, which is a perfect example of I'm popping up onto the screen right now. This is the second book of the Age of Wrath, which is coming out in the fall. The first of two books that were coming out in the fall. First off, the cover's amazing. I love the first cover too, but you never really see like yellow pop out like
Yeah. Yellow is an underused color for fantasy covers, I think.
it is, and it's really awesome. I remember when it first came out, a lot of people, like people I was talking to at least, were like, "Yeah, what a cool colors palette." And
Yeah.
so I want to especially first off give some shout out to that because it's really cool and jumps right off at you. But
Yeah.
obviously, I haven't read book two yet, but book one, I wanted to see. Um, Coming in talking about Covenant of Steel, what made you want to continue with that world and just pick a different location? When you finished book three, was there an idea of this is what I'm going to go for next?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, yeah, there was another thing which I can't talk about, I'm afraid, that I am contracted to write, which was going to be what I wrote after Covenant of Steel, but for various reasons, I ended up writing Age of Wrath, uh, more or less straight afterwards. And there's something to be said for having a world that's still fresh in the mind, in terms of the continuity, even though it's set 20 years after Covenant of Steel. Uh, but exploring different aspects of the same world. I mean, we think about the medieval era, but when we think about the medieval era, all we're thinking about is medieval Europe. We're not thinking about what's happening in China or Japan or India or all the myriad other places, or South America, all the other places around the world where things were not the same. You talk about the medieval world. The medieval world, as we understand it, is in Western context, was limited to a fairly small geographic area. And there were a hell of a lot of other things, just as interesting things, going on elsewhere. So I thought exploring something like, a Norse-based culture, even though by the medieval period in real history, the Norse culture as we understand it had started to kind of ebb away. It wasn't what it used to be. It had become Christianized and sort of absorbed into the wider European culture by then. But once again, when you're writing fantasy, you can just make it up. So they can see it as the kind of vibrant Norse culture had somehow maintained itself in this world, which hadn't happened in our world. And they'd also made it across a fairly big expanse of ocean to discover a new continent, which we believe is probably what happened with the Vikings who sailed across the North Atlantic. Um, the people may disagree, but I think it's probably likely they did make it to North America. So yeah, and then it gives you a lot of scope. That having happened and you taking it and putting it in a fantasy context, it gives you a lot to play with from a storytelling point of view. There's a wide geographical area and a lot of ideas that arise out of all of that. So,
And was that kind of another similar reason why Covenant of Steel was first person? You're focusing on Alwyn, but in this, like you said, you wanted to branch out after
yeah.
Bloodsong, where multi POVs came into books 2 and 3. But was that the reason why I think we have 4 POVs in Age of Wrath so far?
Yeah. It's always dictated by the story. Covenant of Steel is told in first person from one point of view because it could be. The story was kind of designed to be told from that point of view. Even then, there are things that happen off camera, which you can't get away from if you're going to write a first person narrative. With Age of Wrath, there was no way that the scale of the story was such that it just couldn't be told from a first person narrative. It needed to be multi point of view. And there's no other way to do it. And I kind of had the characters in my head as I was coming up with the story as well. So that I don't see character and plot and character and story as separate things. They're the same thing in my head. Yes, in the way you write characters as opposed to the way you convey a plot, there are differences there. But in terms of conceiving the story and coming up with the outline for it, I don't differentiate between plot and character.
And it's funny that's what I was going to ask next, especially when you mentioned that Vikings aren't the typical. They weren't, I should say, blonde hair, long, swinging around with an axe.
Yeah.
So that was a lot of fun to read book 1 of this because 2 of the characters we have, were female, and one of them was a scribe. She's a historian. So that was a lot of fun to do. But going into the story, I know you already said that the characters kind of conform to the world that's built around them. But it felt like in this book especially there's a huge aspect of forgotten history to the world. But the way that was conveyed and discovered, did you have background lore that you are waiting to unveil into books 2 or 3, or did you kind of lay the groundwork with 1 and it'll go from there?
There are things still to come out, as you'll find out at the end of book 2. That we haven't. Not all has been revealed about the truths of Asgardian history, and they did write quite a long chronology, sort of year by year chronology of what happened to lead up to the start of book 1 in the series. Maybe a tenth of it gets reflected in the actual books. It's quite a long, narrative. And I will go back and change it to fit the story if I need to. I did the same thing for the Draconis Memoria books as well. Because I think I needed the I needed it to feel like it was already ancient. This culture, and there needed to be a weight to it. The not just the stories they tell each other, but the customs and the rituals they perform, and their understanding of their gods and so on. Well, I wanted it to feel as solid as I could make it.
And is that one of the hardest aspects for you, writing a story like this? Because there's so many different kind of political aspects to it, where there's the sister queens, there's all these different like the jarls who are leading all the different groups, but in the general, the different locations have their own views of similar gods. But how do you get all of that across without it getting very confusing to readers? Because I know sometimes I had to even like double check where I get to something. I'm like, let me hold on, go back a couple pages and go, oh, okay. And
Yeah.
you're very good at describing it like that. But how do you go about that where it doesn't get too convoluted?
I think I'm always actually. I tend to simplify things. It might seem like it's complex on the page, but in comparison to sometimes what I was originally going to do, I've often simplified things a lot and taken out a lot of the more extraneous detail. I think deleting extraneous detail is one of the keys to having a clear narrative. I try not to have like side quests or anything. I try to stick as close to the main through line of the narrative as possible, which I think helps with getting people to turn the page. And I think that in terms of clarity and in terms of not confusing people, um, there's a lot to be said for rewriting. If I'm confused when I read it, then obviously it's going to have to change because I wrote it and I'm still confused. So yeah, uh, a lot of the clarity does come out of the rewrite. To be honest,
And what makes you decide what you want to show and tell the reader and what you want to keep intentionally vague?
um, well, I'm always a big believer in the reveal. There's well, it's drama, isn't it? You have to come up with a way of being dramatic without it being really obvious. They can drop obvious red herrings, or obvious clues which people will very easily pick up on. But there are ways to do it, where, just by omitting certain things at certain points, where the dramatic reveal can be a big payoff. It's just a question of drip feeding just as much information to the reader as you have to, without giving too much away. I think it's always a bit of a balancing act, but yeah, I like to think I get it right more often than I get it wrong.
I would definitely say so because I was going to. This is major spoiler, but I have to ask if anyone hasn't read this yet. Feel free to mute me, and I'll give a thumbs up when I'm done. Um, how long did you have it planned out where Elvin would be Alwyn's son? Daughter, sorry.
Page one, I knew going in, even before I started writing, because, well, if you'd read the first series, who else is she going to be? You know, I thought it was really obvious. I even thought maybe I don't even have to mention it because it's so obvious, but
It,
apparently not. A lot of people didn't get it.
when they mentioned the story earlier and they talked about kind of the one night that they spent together, it was like okay, the wheel started turning. But then when it like officially got revealed, I guess towards the end, it was like okay. And then obviously Steven changed his name and so I think you do a great job with the reveals, even with Evadine and the traitor. When we find out what happens to her, I'm not saying anything. um, but so that was a page one thing going in. You were like, I know that she is going to be one of the main characters of this.
Yeah, people can start listening again now.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot. Thumbs up. Um, and moving on to the second book, this is a question leading into it, but in all the books we've talked about so far, it's a lot of epic fantasy based on historical stuff. Blood Song, Covenant of Steel, everything. But I was very, kind of not a taken back, but I was pleasantly surprised, I should say, when I saw The Feeding get promoted, because this, to me, I didn't know that you had another story called Red River 7, which I want to ask about as well. But to me, this was my first experience with you as post-apocalyptic,
Yeah.
um, horror-y. So compared to the epic fantasy stuff that you're extremely well known for, how does the process differ when you do such a like a genre shift? It's such a different uh, type of story. So how do you go about that?
Uh, well, the outlining is different because I don't have to do as much world building because it's just our world, but altered. So you don't have to come up with names for things and all the rest of it. Uh, and I find the outlining is for these Red River Seven and the Feeding and the next one, which I can't reveal the title of, but there is another one in a similar vein coming. Um, the outlining is much more dialogue heavy. It's like 80% dialogue for the outline and very little description of the plot, which you find is really useful, actually. I mean, it's not like I take all the dialogue, dump it in, and never change it. The dialogue is not written in advance. I change pretty much all of it. But it's surprising how good doing a dialogue heavy outline is for speeding up the writing process. Because these, so far, Red River Seven and the Feeding and the next one, I wrote them all fairly quickly, even though they're shorter books than I usually write. But I did get through them, in the short, not the many months that it takes me to write an epic fantasy novel. Uh, so yeah, obviously, as ever with everything I write, there's a lot of rewriting and so on to get it right. But yeah, I think that the biggest change is in the outlining, uh, and then the speed at which I write. It's probably the biggest difference.
And that was what you touched on what I was going to ask as well, because like you said, this book is shorter than most of the other ones, um,
Hmm.
especially the fantasy, obviously. But with that lesser degree of world building and the dialogue making up the most of it,
Hmm.
um, how do you kind of dive into that? I know you just said it was more 80% dialogue based, but that kind of, I think, for me means like the characters have to be stronger to identify with them more and care about them more. How do you
Yeah.
how do you deliver such an emotional impact in a shorter story? Is what I'm trying to say. Through mostly the dialogue like that.
Yeah, I mean, Red River Seven was a difficult one because if you read it, that it's about a bunch of people who wake up on a military patrol boat and none of them knows who they are. They've all lost their memory, and obviously trying to convey character in a group of people who don't know who they are, that was a singular challenge. But the conceit was, when I was writing it was, even though they can't remember who they are still who they were. They don't have personal memories, but the personality hasn't gone. It's still largely intact. They just discover it in the course of the journey that they're on. And I think it's a bit of a gift with a post-apocalyptic setting or a survival setting because everything's ramped up to 11. All the stakes are higher. Every decision is a life or death decision. So the emotional content is automatically ramped up. Uh, I'm not saying it's easy to convey emotion like that, but it does give you an advantage as a writer because everything can be played to the max. Everything is high stakes. Certainly true in the Feeding as well, where it's a destroyed world. It's a world in the not really a spoiler because it's kind of obvious, but it's a vampire. It's the aftermath of a vampire apocalypse. Um, Human beings are now prey, basically. And in a world like that, and where every decision is life or death, it's sort of, you know, it's automatically more emotional. It's a way of doing it, I suppose.
And I'm sure it almost was a little bit more fun trying to come up with some of the character, not the human characters, but the vampiric ones, where it was the alphas, the betas, the what made you want to come up with the different levels of, I guess, almost infection, would you call it? But the way that each of those groups act and behave, because they all pose such unique threats on their own.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I wanted to. The vampires are not supernatural in this. They are a mutation. They've contracted a disease that's mutated, basically. In real world disease, there was always different levels. People who caught COVID. Not everybody died from COVID. Some people had it bad. Some people had it mild, and of course, there was long COVID. There was people today still suffering from long COVID. So it was the idea of having, this contagion which affects people in different ways, where there's, only a very, very select few get to be the fully sentient alphas, who are, the idea was that they'd always been around, and the alphas had been the principal form of vampire for centuries. And then there'd been a mutation in the, whatever it is that turns them into a vampire. The molecule had mutated and created the alpha, the betas, and the gammas, and that is what has destroyed the world. The alphas are still hanging around in the shadows somewhere. Uh, it's a way of doing something a bit different with vampires, because vampires have been done to death. Pardon the pun, but yes, there's been so many different variations on vampires. Trying to come up with something a bit different with them. The idea that they don't burst into flames when they're exposed to sunlight, because if they were going to be real world creatures, real world predators, that makes no sense whatsoever. There is no predatory creature on this earth, even the nocturnal ones, that bursts into flame when it's exposed to sunlight. So that had to go. Also, the garlic and holy water thing. I didn't keep that either.
yeah, thankfully. Isn't it weird? There's always some type of media like that where, whether it's a book, a movie, anything. Have you seen the movie Signs?
Yeah,
You
yeah.
remember?
I liked it for what it was, but the aliens are going to invade a water planet, even though they're allergic to water. It makes no bloody sense whatsoever.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. It was like an 80% water planet, and they got, probably
Yeah.
terrible tap water tipped on them and started sizzling. And it's like, what are you doing here?
What you come here? Also, they're technologically advanced. They're capable of, faster than light travel. But their invasion plan is to land as individuals and fight as hand-to-hand combat, so they can be defeated with a glass of water and a baseball bat. Um, yeah, I think
It was a good movie thematically. Like, I liked everything that they talked about, fate.
it's a well-made Hitchcockian alien invasion drama. I liked it on that level,
Yes.
but and the sort of fundamentals of storytelling level, it doesn't really work.
It dropped a little bit when you realized you could turn on like your sprinklers and defend your house for as long as it takes, really. Yeah. Um, with
I just wait for it to rain.
yeah, all you need is that too. Yeah, it did lack a little bit of believability.
Not as bad as The Happening, though. The Happening.
Oh
If you've seen
boy.
The Happening, oh God.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Oh dear.
Um, yeah, the happening was brutal. I forgot about that. I wanted to ask in the feeding, the second half of it is relentlessly fast paced.
Hmm.
It really picks up a lot. Um, but how do you go about writing scene after scene where it's action and pushing the plot and really just builds up um, without it getting boring? I feel like a lot of people write action scenes and it's like, okay, and now like I'm a little tired of it. I could use a break, but the way that you do it is it doesn't get tiresome to read.
Yeah, well, the thing is, the breaks are in there, but I think people don't notice them. Is the thing. There are lulls between the action, and you need them. If it's just non-stop action, yeah, people get worn out by it. So there needs to be breaks into it. But I think because I wove them into the narrative, they're woven into the journey. If there's a break, the characters are usually still in motion somehow, or they're still talking about what they're going to do next. But they might not be fighting the vampires in that moment. Uh, so yeah, you do need the breaks, but I think there's a way to keep the narrative moving whilst having the lulls between the battles, as it were.
Yeah. There's a couple of lulls in there, but one or two of them have major plot implications with some spoilers, so I'm kind of just glossing over that. But this book, especially in the world today, is almost begging for a live action. Has there been any talk about that?
Not for the feeding, unfortunately, but who knows? If enough people buy it, we'll see. Red River Seven, there was a lot more interest adaptation wise. I can't say anything about it, but I can say it's been optioned. Whether it will ever get made, yeah, I've learned after quite a long time now that it's nice when a book gets optioned, but don't expect to be attending the premiere anytime soon or ever.
Um, as far as I know, you already mentioned it that there are a couple things in the works that you can't mention. With any of the series that we've talked about, is there any more Valen? Is there any more stuff after Age of Wrath coming? Is there? I know, especially we just talked about the feeding, but with the main things we've talked about, is there future works in regards to any of those?
Yeah, there will be another post-apocalyptic thriller slash horror coming probably late next year, I think. Um, there will be more from Valen. I can't see when or how just yet, but there definitely will be more. In terms of the Covenant of Steel and Age of Wrath world, um, it's very likely there'll be more, but it'll be a while. I do need a bit of a break from that world because
Yeah, six in a row is break.
six in a row. So I will come back to it. I think it's just I've got nascent ideas, but I don't have a fully formed series in my head yet. But when I do, I'll probably come back to it.
Awesome.
As opposed to that, yeah, I'm never shy of ideas, so there'll probably be another world at some point too.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, I know a lot of people are going to be stoked about Valen especially, but I loved this the post-apocalyptic vibe. Did you see 28 Years Later yet?
Not yet. I'm looking forward to it. I don't go to the movies anymore. I just wait for them to appear on streaming, which I shouldn't do. I know. It's just I stopped going during the pandemic and never went back, basically. So yeah, but I will definitely see it. I'm looking forward to that one, definitely.
Yeah, there were some alphas in that, and I was like, I went with my brother and his wife, and I was just like, it's like the feeding. It's like he wrote this already, and my brother was like, what are you talking about? But it reminded me of that. They're just as horrifying in this as beforehand. It's a lot of fun to watch Danny Boyle make movies,
Yeah.
especially the way they handled that. But what other hobbies do you have as far as movies, TV? Do you like anything specifically that's going on right now?
Play video games in between books. When I've finished a draft, I'll usually fire up the PlayStation and choose a game. I'm playing Little Nightmares at the moment, which is a few years old, but I'm enjoying it a lot. It's a kind of dark Tim Burton-esque platformer, puzzly game. I like those sort of things. I find as I've got older, I've become less and less interested in things like Call of Duty. The last one of those I tried to play, I was so bored. Just running around shooting things, it got boring very quickly. So these days, when I play a game, I like something that challenges my brain a bit. Other than that, I read a lot. That's I guess my principal hobby. Yeah, hobbies wise, it tends to be the occasional video game and just reading a lot.
Do you have any books that you're reading right now that you'd recommend? It's funny you mentioned Call of Duty because I played the. I think I stopped when they got futuristic and people were flying around with space packs, and I was getting killed from across the map, and I was like, I'm way too. I felt too old for this. I was like, I can't have the brain capacity to pull this off anymore. But
Yeah, well, they are games designed for adolescent boys to play against each other online and call each other, you know, various slurs. That's kind of what they're designed to be. Uh, but yeah, games wise, I like Subnautica if you played that. Uh, because I like the challenge of it and that sort of thing. And it had a pretty strong narrative. Games with a lot of narrative. In terms of what I'm reading Angie Kills a King. I'm blanking on the author's name, but it came out, I think, a month or so ago, which is very good, incidentally. It's got sort of David Gemmell vibes to it, amongst other things. But yeah, it's a good book. Also, The Wolf and the Wild King by K.V. Johansson, I read last year. I got an arc of it, which is, I think, criminally overlooked, frankly. It's a wonderful book. So, yeah. Also, I have this thing these days where I read things and then instantly forget. But yeah,
uh,
I'm always reading something.
this game that Greg mentioned, I put it up on the screen there, Expedition 33.
Oh,
Sounds almost right up your alley. Claire Obscura, I think it's called, the
looked
main
at
character.
that. I thought it was a co-op game.
No, that is, it's like, I encourage you to check it out because I'll do no justice describing it, but it
Hmm.
was a very uh, indie game. I think it was made by one of the guys from BioWare in his off time, but the person that did the score they found online, the script writer they found someone on like Reddit. It's like a single player turn based game, and apparently he's beaten it. I know a bunch of other people have beaten it. My brother, I'm still early on in it. Incredible, especially as far as storyline goes. Beautiful story and project, he's saying, but definitely something. If you're looking for a game, that sounds right up your alley with this type of stuff you enjoy. It seems.
Yeah, I'll definitely check it out. Yeah, I mean,
And
I've got others sitting on the PlayStation unplayed. I've got Cyberpunk, whatever it was called. I've got that. I still haven't touched it since I bought it. I've got the most recent Assassin's Creed game. Still haven't touched that either. So I need to catch up, definitely.
it's very funny talking to you, who is crushing my TBR, and we are in turn destroying your TB played.
Yeah.
So it's kind of nice to, you know, dish some out to you a little bit. Um, but before we end, I wanted to ask, this was another one of the Reddit questions, but what input do you have for writers trying to navigate both sides? As someone who has been on the self pub side and the traditional side, just your experience and some input slash advice.
Um, Whichever side you're on, you have to remember that. I mean, there's this old phrase that quantity has a quality all of its own. I'd say that quality has a quantity all of its own. You should always put out your best efforts, whether you're self-published or traditionally published. And that means if you're self-publishing, it has to be the best book you can possibly produce on your own merits. So you have to put the time in. Obviously, it has to be. You have to write the thing, which is always the hardest part. You have to get it professionally edited, and you have to get a professional cover so that it looks indistinguishable from a traditionally published book. Uh, and don't just show it to your family and have them tell you how great it is, and then put it out there with a cover you made on Canva or something, because it probably won't work. You need to get professional input, and I'm afraid that does mean spending money. For a professional edit, you're talking 3 grand and up, which I know is a lot for people. There are other ways, there are cheaper ways of doing it. If you join critique groups or whatever, but it is vital to get other eyes on it before you ever publish it, and get it properly edited, get it proofread. On the other side of the spectrum, when it comes to traditional publishing, you have to go through agents. There's no way around the agents. They are still the gatekeepers. And it's a curious thing. When self-publishing came along and kind of exploded, everyone thought that the profession of agent was going to go away or something. It hasn't. Agents were drowning in submissions before self-publishing came along, and they're still drowning in submissions now. People still want to be traditionally published. So if you're going to submit to an agent, take a look at what they're asking for. Every agent these days has a website, and they will state clearly on there what they're looking for. So if they're looking for epic fantasy, don't send them, urban fantasy, because they're not interested in it. So, vice versa. You have to stick closely to their guidelines. If they're asking for 3 chapters, don't send them the whole book. Send them 3 chapters. And these days you can go out and find, samples of cover letters, or, the letter you send with the submission. It's a good idea to nail that down be as precise with it as possible, and with your elevator pitch. Don't just pick, the top bestsellers in your genre for the last couple of years and say this will appeal to readers who've read this thing and this thing and this thing. Be a bit more creative with it. Do a bit more of a deep dive. Don't choose the obvious titles as your comp title. Or if you're doing it's Die Hard meets Lord of the Rings or whatever, maybe choose examples that aren't quite so obvious.
It kind of makes you want to read something that's Die Hard meets Lord of the Rings, though, doesn't it?
Yeah, maybe I'll do that next.
Please do. But yeah, that was a great answer. I know everyone watching and who will be watching appreciate it. Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. This actually flew by. I would take the rest of my workday off if I could and keep talking.
What have we done? We've done an hour. Wow.
Yeah, and I could have kept going. I have some stuff I crossed off, and even the ones that you answered before I asked. So,
well, I'm happy to come back if you ever want to do this again. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But I just wanted to say again, I appreciate it very much. This was a very big deal for me for one of my favorite authors. So thank you for coming on even before I did a show and saying yes. I could have sucked and you would have been locked in. So hopefully it's a little better than we thought about that. But yeah, thank you again. And thank you for everyone in the chat. And I hope you have a great rest of your night, sir.
Thank you, Pete. Enjoyed it. Thank you. Take care. Thanks for everyone tuning in.